Good evening everyone, and welcome to another thrilling adventure in Yorkshire history. Now, at Halloween time, you could go on an overpriced ghost tour and shiver in the cold while someone tells you the equivalent of tat for tourists, or, alternatively, you could sit in your own nice comfy house and listen to me tell stories for free. So, which one is it? Let's start with East Riddlesden Hall, which is a 17th century house near Keighley. I mean, come on, just look at it. Of course it's going to be haunted. The colourful cast of ghosts includes a murderer who stalks a reception, a grey lady who wanders a corridor looking for her lover, a small girl in blue who sits and weeps in the corner of the porch, and a white lady who drowned in the pond. There's also a cradle which rocks with no one touching it. In 1963, a taxi driver came to the hall to pick up a passenger. There were no lights on in the porch or grounds, and so it was too dark to see the doorbell, so he went round to the side and looked through one of the windows. There he saw a lady wearing historical clothes, but because it was so close to Christmas, he thought it was fancy dress for a party and thought no more of it. He went back round to the entrance and found it unlocked. He walked in. There was no one there. He called out. There was no reply. He then heard faint music coming from one of the rooms, and when he walked in the direction, he entered a room in which was sat his passenger, a lady dressed in ordinary office clothes. As they were driving in the taxi, he happened to mention how he saw the lady in historical clothes, to which the passenger went silent for a moment before saying, "You must have seen our ghost." The next one is from Kirkby Fleetham Hall near Ripon. At the time, there were two resident caretakers, Mr. and Mrs. Clark. Now, one day, Mrs. Clark was expecting a female visitor, so she waited up all night for them to arrive, but they never came, so she locked up and closed for the evening and went to bed. She was then woken up at 2 a.m. by the sound of a car going into the driveway and the loud bang of a door. She went to the window and she saw an old white-haired lady get out of the car. It was a standard Vanguard car, before getting back in again and driving off. The next day, Mrs. Clark received a phone call from the visitor's companion saying that the visitor could no longer come because she had been killed in a car accident at 2 p.m. the previous day in her own car, a standard Vanguard. Mrs. Clark then remembered that the previous night she had locked the gates of the drive and that therefore no car could have come in that night. Now, what do you do when you encounter a ghost? Well, this report from 1899 gives the perfect Yorkshire response. A man of Guysborough, entering a shop in this fishy old town of Whitby, saw his own wraith standing there unoccupied. He called it a waff. Now, it is unlucky in the highest degree to meet one's own double. In fact, it is commonly regarded as a sign of early death. There is but one path of safety. You must address it boldly. The Guysborough man was well aware of this, and went up without hesitation to the waff. "What's the doing here?" he said roughly. "What's the doing here? There's after no good, I'll get a bail. Get the wazium with it, get the wazium." Whereupon the waff slunk off abashed, and the evil design with which it came to Whitby was brought happily to naught. Finally, I want to end with a grisly true crime story, because as a bit of a true crime buff, I just can't resist tales of the macabre, the turbid ebb and flow of human misery, and this one concerns a Yorkshire serial killer. No, not that one. This one is called John Christie, and he was born in Halifax in 1899. He committed a lot of petty crimes whilst in Yorkshire and went in and out of prison. But in 1934 he moved with his wife to 10 Rillington Place in London. Over a 10-year period he murdered at least 8 women, by first rendering them unconscious with oven gas. They used a different type of gas back then, and it was actually quite a common suicide method, before strangling them. Some of them he buried in the garden, others he put in an alcove in the kitchen wall, then plastered over with wallpaper. In 1948, he murdered his fellow resident Beryl Evans, her daughter Geraldine, and Beryl's unborn baby. Beryl's husband Timothy was either forced to confess or had his confession forged, as he was put on trial and found guilty. Despite his protestations and his direct accusation of Christie's involvement in the murder, he was found guilty and executed in 1950. The shock and uproar which this caused when it was revealed that Christie was a murderer made the case one of the defining moments in the campaign to end the death penalty. The death penalty was abolished in 1965 and Timothy Evans pardoned in 1966. In 1952, Christie murdered his wife and then forged letters to her family to convince them that she was all right after not being seen in public for a long time. In 1953, someone peeled back the wallpaper on the kitchen alcove and discovered the bodies of 3 murdered women. After a mini manhunt in London, Christie was arrested and put on trial. He was hanged that year by Albert Pierrepoint, the most prolific hangman of the 20th century, who also happened to be a Yorkshireman. Pierrepoint had previously hanged Timothy Evans. Christie reportedly, as he was about to be hanged, said that his nose itched. Pierrepoint replied by saying that it won't bother you for long. That's all I've got time for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, I hope you've learnt something new, and I hope you've been feeling very spooky.